What we've got next is Rob, who I'm told by Rob, his surname so Rob's Italian, but his surname in Spanish means the ugly, I think. So
there's nothing to back that up.
So Ugly Rob is going to be telling us about natural language processing, which is some stuff that Rob's been playing around with recently and is really quite interesting. So, Ugly Rob, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I've learned one really key lesson today. Never mention something like this on the day that the talk's going to be. Okay, so as you said, I would like to first talk to you about travel search before going into details of natural language processing. But more specifically, the actual online travel search that we do, which is, and in this case, hotel searching, because that's what we specialise in here in Sweden. And I guess most people's experience of this is through an online site, and they ask you lots of little questions. They're kind of along the lines of where, when, who, or how many. So all the advancements we've done in recent web technology has given, I guess, the customer an idea of what the travel agent used to have, i.e. behind the screens, all that information they had, so all the hotels. However, it still comes with a really key restriction. They need to have a really good idea about where they want to go, and also a pretty good idea about when they want to go. And this isn't necessarily what people are actually after. They could just be looking for a theme, maybe a beach, or an activity, maybe skydiving. So we all do this. So can we not make it a little bit more natural for them? Open up these possibilities. So instead of them having to arrive at our site or another similar site and fill out the where, the what, and the when, or perhaps go into a search engine and type in Hotel Paris and maybe arriving slightly closer to their destination, but they still need to figure out the when and how many. Offer them something that would be simpler or more natural to say, I want to go to Paris for the weekend, or I want to relax on the beach. So this was the basis of our problem, which is actually a considerable problem for computers. They're pretty good at a lot of stuff, but understanding human intention, the way we write, and figuring that out, is really certainly not one of them. One of the key possibilities to solving this problem is with NLP. Not the psychological part, the neuro-linguistic programming, but rather natural language processing, which is basically the field of computer science that deals with understanding human text, hence the possible solution. We have been focusing on Stanford University's offering of this. They have a large set of libraries, and we've been building on top of them. So we'll go into a little bit of detail about how this works by focusing on the components that we took and have been extending on and using the most. These are components that look at the semantic structure of the sentence, also figure out entities and types of entities in a sentence, and temporal terms. They're pretty key things for us. The first part that we took a look at was part-of-speech tagging. Bear with me, this is all quite technical in English and I'm still getting my head around it. But basically this will take a phrase, so for example something simple we'll start with, I want to visit Paris. And the first part is to break it into tokens, which basically is a word. So it will we then pass it through the tagger and it will apply a part-of-speech definition, which is the more complicated version that you would have learned at school, the noun, adjective, and verb. So here, I is a preposition, want is a verb, to is defined as a to, visit, another verb, and Paris, a noun pronoun. Everyone's looking kind of blank in the audience, which is excellent because I didn't get this either. I really genuinely didn't. Extending it a little bit more, for a weekend. So for is another different type of preposition this time. A is a determinator, and weekend is another noun. As we said, this is a really technical view on an English sentence, and that's how a machine approaches it. But it doesn't really give us any useful information from first glance about how we can make that into a search. Apart from maybe looking and saying, well, weekend and Paris, they look like things we could search on. So maybe we should look at the nouns and focus there. But the problem with that, when you have a more complicated phrase with more nouns, it'll give very confusing results because not all are relevant. And also, if we said it was a romantic weekend in Paris, Romantic's an adjective. And again, that's something we could really use. So, as interesting as that was, needed something a bit more, something that would really help with the problem. What I really wanted was something that would tell me about the entities. And basically there is something called named entity recognizer, which will tell me who's who and what's what. The best way to show this, I think, is with an example. So, a bit of a news extract. We have Brad Pitt doing some hard work over in Cannes promoting the film festival. Passing the named entity recognizer of this will give a result a little bit like this. I hope you can all see, but it's spotted Brad Pitt, Cannes Film Festival, and France. Not only has it spotted them, but it's also identified that Brad Pitt's a person, and France is a location. So we can take the value, if we think of Cannes Film Festival, and look it up in an organisation database, and actually find some information about it. So this looked all really promising. And this was kind of the approach we were going to take. So if we go back to the phrase we were looking at before, I want to take a visit to Paris for a romantic weekend, and pass over that same named entity recognizer. We're really keen for it to find Paris as a location, and romantic and weekend. But the biggest problem with it was, although it recognised that Paris was a location, it didn't have a clue about romantic and weekends. There's a very simple reason for this, is the default recognizer was designed as a demonstration to show people how it could work. So it was there to recognise locations, people, and organisations. So we needed a more specific solution to this. And one of the things you can do, because NLP is based on machine learning, is teach the computer to understand text they're interested in. So what we did, well, actually, before we go on to that, a really important thing to note is you teach it with information you expect it to understand in the future. So if we fed it with Shakespeare, it would do a fantastic job of understanding Elizabethan plays, but as for knowing where you want to go on holiday, it just wouldn't have a clue. So we needed to find some relevant data. And this was actually more of a challenge than I thought it would be, because we don't really know what people are going to ask us. It's a reasonably new approach. Looking at the Google searches that arrived at our sites, they were all Hotel Miami, maybe South Beach in there, but there's not a sentence, there's not a question. So we actually turned to Amazon and Mechanical Turk, and there we asked a lot of normal people to provide us a clue as to how they'd ask this question. And we ended up with a decent set of data. So we took it and we used it as training. We took most of it for the training, but saved back 10 to 15% for validation and testing purposes. So, give you a little example about the sort of things that we got. I want to go skiing or snowboarding in the Alps. How do we train this? Well, what we do is we highlight the parts that we're interested in. So we say that skiing is an activity, so is snowboarding, and so is Alps as a location. The key thing to note is we've actually set a boundary. So when it comes to extract it will know that it's not just boarding or snow that's the activity, it's snowboarding. Again, another example to emphasize this, rock climbing in Malta. Again, rock climbing is the boundary and Malta the location. Something a bit more low-key for us, we have a relaxing weekend at a hotel and wellness centre. Well, we got a bit more creative and we said, well, relaxing is a theme, wellness centre is an amenity. Very last one, a little less obvious this time, but we say that city break is actually the theme this time around. And we had to apply this to many hundreds and thousands of sentences. But once we did this, and took that same phrase that we had before, which was, I want to visit Paris for a romantic weekend, this time, it did a lot better job. Okay, so it still found Paris, which was something that it was doing before, but we actually threw away the old training data. We needed to maintain the fact that it would understand Paris. And also it started to recognise that romantic was a theme. And weekend, if you notice, I didn't tag the other parts as temporal terms. We found there's a specialised temporal tag that understands time, how we express it, whether it's a date or whether it's an event. So we use that to take these rules. Okay, so for me this was really curious actually. I wanted to know more about how this worked rather than more about how the part of speech tagging worked. But I had to understand the part of speech to get to there. So how did it know that that was a place or that was an activity? Well, what it does is it looks at the full sentence. So it will take the word and look maybe 2-3 words before, or no, 2 or 3 words afterwards, or the 3-4 words before, to see how that sentence was structured and whether it should be expecting a place or expecting a location. And this is kind of what we do as well. To give you an example, here I have Goodman's. Now what does this mean to everyone here? This might remind you of the old hi-fi systems sort of back in the 80s. Or there's a steak restaurant, or there's a doctor's, a lawyer's, and another one as well. I can't remember the Google list. But we don't know what it is. However, if we put it in a sentence, and we say, I'm going to eat at Goodman's tonight, we have a really good idea. We can all guess it's a restaurant, or at least somewhere that serves food in the evenings. And that's basically exactly the same thing that the entity recognizer will do. Look at a structure, look at the definitions of the words, and make a best guess. It doesn't just use this, it uses combinations of patterns, because this isn't necessarily definitive or conclusive. Another thing it looks like is the structure of a word. So if we imagine people typed in perfectly into the screen, a place would have a capital. And also it will look at the length of the word. Maybe there's some correlation between activities and places. Other things would be the ending of a word. Greenland, Finland, Ireland. They all end in land, obviously. So we could say that this represents a location. Other really common endings for locations are G-turn, or Eald, as in everything is in field, or Stan, as in many of the countries over in the east. So we can start combining these together. Another really good example is actually activities. They all seem to end in ing: skiing, hiking, climbing, skydiving, whatever it may be. Now, you combine these two methods, these are the two key ones, but also several others, to make a best guess. So we have our sentence tagged. We actually have a lot of information about this, and we can now maybe attempt to do a search, attempt to figure out what somebody really meant. So let's pick our example we're using, the Paris Romantic Weekend. That's almost the basis for doing this additional search. We know where. We have a theme, which we can start to maybe filter some of the hotels out, at least make sure there's 2 people on a double bed. And we have weekend, which is kind of a time. It's more of a duration, a Saturday or Sunday. But we don't really know when. They haven't given us that information. We don't want to keep asking lots of questions. Let's do what a travel agent would do and suggest something. So how can we do that? Well, we actually have a huge amount of data. We know, looking at our past data, how often people from time of booking to time of travel go. And that turns out to be called our booking window. So on average, it is approximately 24 days. So if we said, if someone typed this phrase in today, we're expecting them to go in 3 weeks, 3 and a bit weeks, so that's going to be towards the end of September, the 29th, it's a Saturday. So we could maybe suggest this date to them. But maybe let's go a little bit more specific. We know a weekend is not just any old duration, it's 2 days. And if we apply that logic, or found that out, it's actually 18, it's 2 days. And if we apply that logic, or found that out, it's actually 18 days in practice. So that brings us to the 22nd. And we can even go further as well. Because if we said Paris for 2 days, maybe that would yield something else. Another really good example to demonstrate was for 24 days as our average, 2 days, for a 2-day weekend trip, it's 18 days. If we go for more than a week, we actually go something along the lines of 56 days we book before going on a long trip. So there's really a huge amount of information that we can use to fill in the missing gaps that we perhaps don't know about. And instead of using an arbitrary number, something that's a guess overall, we can use the information given to us and arrive hopefully a lot closer. Another problem, or something that is very normal we've all experienced, is when I say something, or when anyone says something, we don't necessarily say exactly what we mean. So an example of this we can use again is Paris for a weekend. Now this might be quite literal, and that's the key thing to note. Whatever neurolinguistic program will do, it'll do it very, very literally. It doesn't have that context to put to it. So we assume that weekend is the Saturday and the Sunday, which, yeah, okay, sounds about right. We hop on the train, we go to Paris, we go out, we have a meal, we come back. But a lot of people also say, I want to go to New York for the weekend. And that's almost unlikely, or maybe not even possible, in the sense that the duration to get there, the time zones, and all that effort and cost, could probably stop them a lot longer. And again, we can use our figures and our understanding about how long people, in average, stop in New York and understand it's probably a Friday to a Monday. So we can take that search, instead of searching for a weekend, stretch it out and give probably a more accurate result of what somebody is looking for. So, after showing a lot of my colleagues and friends and talking about this sort of thing, I've been asked, I guess, two really key reoccurring questions. The first one seems to be, okay, well this is all very good, but it seems a bit of a gimmick. Do people really want this? Is anyone actually interested in doing this? And, okay, so there's some truth in what they say. We're quite happy with the way that we look for holidays. We have a lot of information there. But also, you know, we don't necessarily need to know or want to know the exact location. We're looking for more options available to us. And there's already steps being made to searching by theme. If you want to go skiing, looking for them types of holidays, rather than saying Chamonix in France. Also as well, before in the past, if you ever typed a sentence into Google, you would get almost no results. You had to remove the words. But now that's changed. It's accepting more natural queries. And then with voice-activated searching, we're just not shouting into our phone, Miami Beach, hotel. We want to ask a question. We want to talk normally. The next question I've been asked is, can it work? Is this even possible? Well, thanks, first of all, but yes, never 100%. I think that's fair to say. But using the input we'll get, instead of relying on Mechanical Turk to provide us with the phrases people ask for, we'll get real-life data, and we'll be able to train it with that real-life data. And it gets more and more accurate the more you put into it. Also as well, the use of statistics. These are some of the cases that we've found out, but we will see how people use it. We'll see what they typed in, what we suggested, and what they ended up looking at more detail, and what they ended up booking. Also, we have huge information on clusters of hotels. Why certain hotels? We know that certain hotels are grouped together, but we don't yet understand why. Once we get more understanding on this, yes, frankly, I believe so. Also, as well, more importantly than any of this, I'm actually still in my probation, so I need it to work. It's just not. But there are some things that need improvements. A mini to-do list would be spelling mistakes. We need to maybe apply autocorrection. People with bad grammar, or the under 14 problem, we need to somehow understand this. Again, as long as we train it in that way, it should understand it. Other things, acronyms, abbreviations, the list goes on. So, I would like to leave you with an example of where we want to be. So, instead of restricting somebody to having to specify that they want to go to Malaga, which puts you about here, on holiday, is it really their requirement to go to Malaga? Or are they just asking to go to a beach, have some sand amongst your feet, some seafood nearby, some sun, some restaurants? Would maybe not Soler, also just around the corner in Spain, or Praia de Rocha, which is in Portugal, these would not be sufficient, or maybe even more interesting. Or maybe we can suggest any of these other locations which fulfill the basic requirements that people are most likely actually looking for. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting, and thank you.